Hello, welcome to my village. Most people here call me Assad. It means lucky, but it's not my real name. They just started to call me that. I'm 8 years old. I live here with my mom and dad and my two brothers and three sisters. Their names are Olyinka, Zumdan, Ayana, Dalia, and Zara. We get most of our food from our family's garden and from our chickens and goats and cow. We get water from the village well. It's a 20-minute walk over a rocky path through the forest. We carry the water in big plastic bottles that are kind of heavy, and we collect sticks and branches to make fires for cooking. I didn't always live with my family. I just came back. I was born with crooked feet. I don't know why. My brothers and sisters were born with straight feet. I wasn't as lucky as them. Maybe when I was born, my name should have been Unlucky. The doctor at the hospital later told me that having crooked feet wasn't my fault. It wasn't my mom's or my dad's fault either. It is just one of those things that happen to some kids. My mom said that when I was born, my dad was not very happy. He had never seen a baby like me before, and he didn't want other people to see me or my feet. He didn't understand that crooked feet just happen sometimes. My mom said Dad was worried that I would never be able to carry water from the well, never collect firewood, never work in the garden, or never even walk to school. He was worried that I would make life harder for my mom, harder for my brothers and sisters, and harder for him. I was unlucky to be born with crooked feet, but I was lucky that my grandma said I could come live with her. Grandma lives right here in our village. She told my family they could come to visit me any time and help her take care of me. When I was little, I had fun crawling around in the dirt. I didn't even care when it rained and I got all muddy. It was a little messy, but playing in the mud was fun. Grandma said that when I got older, she saw I was going to have a big problem trying to walk. My feet were so crooked that one pointed at my other foot, and that one almost pointed behind me. And my feet were folded over. I was standing on the sides. I tried and tried to walk, but it hurt, and I kept falling down. It was easier for me to keep doing what I did as a baby. I crawled. It was okay. I never really went very far anyway, just around Grandma's house. Sometimes there wasn't a lot to do at Grandma's, but we liked listening to the radio when she could get good batteries. Every afternoon, I waited for my brothers and sisters to visit on their way home from school. They shared some of their books and papers with me. Grandma was my teacher. Sometimes I wondered what it would feel like to run or kick a ball or climb a tree like the other kids. Sometimes I got mad at my feet. They wouldn't let me do those things. But not long ago, something happened that changed me from being unlucky to being lucky. One day, I was outside getting a drink from the water jug. Two people came up the path from the road. I didn't know who they were. I was happy when Grandma came out before they got too close. I crawled over near Grandma. The visitors said they were learning to be doctors. They were in the village to find out how people live here. They talked to Grandma for a while. They said something about clubfoot. I'd never heard that word before. The way they said it was a little scary. It didn't sound good to me. The visitors asked if Grandma would bring me to their hospital to see a doctor who knew a lot about clubfoot. Grandma thought for a minute, then she said yes. A couple days later, it was exciting. I got to ride in a car for the first time in my life on the way to the hospital. It was fun bouncing over the bumps in the road. The car kept moving from side to side so we wouldn't run into any people or bicycles or animals. We waited around for a while outside. There were lots of other kids and babies and parents. Then a man in white clothes came out and asked us to come in. I held on tight to the man and to Grandma. I tried to walk the best I could. We went into a room with 4 or 5 other people, all dressed in white. I later learned they were doctors and nurses. One of the doctors lifted me up and put me on a table. It was covered with a green cloth. They looked at my feet and moved them around. It felt a little funny, but it didn't hurt. They talked to Grandma. She seemed to agree with what they were saying about my feet and about what they were planning to do. Soon one of the doctors put a cloth, like a long sock, over my foot and leg, up to my knee. He moved my foot around for a minute or two, then he held it still while the nurse wrapped another soft cloth over the sock. Then she began wrapping my foot and the bottom of my leg with a wet cloth. It had some white stuff on it. They called it POP. I later found out that meant plaster of Paris. My leg felt a little warm. The wrap got harder and harder. Then they asked me to bend my knee, and they wrapped the rest of my leg almost to the top. It felt strange, but didn't hurt. A few minutes later, the whole wrap got real hard. Then they did the same thing with my other leg. They called each wrap a cast. That was another new word. After a while, the nurse gave me a piece of candy and 2 shiny metal sticks. She called them crutches. They fit on the top part of my arms. They had handles in the middle. She said they would help me get around better. Then the doctor told Grandma, "The car is ready to take you home. Come back next week." One of the nurse's helpers picked me up and carried me to the car. He must have been very strong. I was 8 years old, and my legs felt heavy with the cast made of POP. When we got back to Grandma's, I had trouble getting up the path. The driver of the car and Grandma held my arms. I tried the best I could to walk using my new crutches. It was hard with my knees bent in the casts. It took a long time. I was tired after my busy day. For the next week, my life was not much fun. The casts were heavy. Getting around, even with my crutches, wasn't easy. Crawling was just as bad, so I didn't move very much. After a while, my legs started to really itch inside the casts. But I couldn't reach in there to scratch. Grandma said to think of other things. That didn't help very much. My brothers and sisters thought my casts were a lot of fun. They wrote their names on them with their school pencils and markers, and they drew pictures of monkeys, lions, elephants, and birds. Sometimes they just made silly scribbles. The next week, the same car and driver came to take us back to the hospital. This time, we went to a different room. I sat on a table just like before. The nurse said, "We are going to take these casts off. The doctor will look at your feet. He will probably put on new ones." I didn't understand why they wanted to do that, but Grandma seemed okay with it, so I wasn't too worried. Then the nurse's helper showed me a big metal tool. He said he was going to use it to cut off my casts. It looked like the one my dad uses to chop up tree branches for the cooking fire. That was scary. He said, "Don't be afraid, it won't hurt." I didn't know if I should believe him. He began at the bottom of the cast near my toes and started to cut through the POP. Part of the tool rubbed against my skin. It didn't hurt, but it didn't feel very good. Then he used another big scary tool to spread the cast open. The POP made a strange cracking sound. I felt cool air on my leg for the first time in a week. I could finally scratch those itches. The nurse's helper took off the cast on my other leg the same way. My legs really liked the fresh air. When I looked at Grandma, she was looking at my feet. She was smiling. I thought she was happy that I could finally scratch. She said she was happy because of the shape of my feet. They weren't pointed as far sideways and backwards as they were last week, and they weren't as folded over. I wasn't sure how that happened. Maybe I was just lucky. The nurse rubbed my legs with some lotion. She said, "It will help with the itching." Her strong helper carried me into the room with all the doctors and nurses. They looked at my feet. They seemed happy. Like the week before, the doctor moved each foot around for a minute or two. Then he held it while the nurse wrapped the POP. I felt good that I knew what POP meant. I wasn't too worried this time. I knew what was going to happen. The next week, and the next week, and the next week, I did the same things. I tried to walk with my crutches. It wasn't easy. I crawled a little. I wanted to scratch a lot. Every day I waited for my brothers and sisters to come after school to write and draw on my casts. We went back to the hospital every week. The same driver came to get us. The same nurse's helper cut off the old cast with the same scary tools. The same doctor moved my feet around. The same nurse wrapped the POP the same way. There was only one thing that was different. Every time they took off the cast, my feet were a little straighter. Every time Grandma smiled a little more. And every time I began to feel more and more lucky. After they took off my cast for the 5th time, the nurse said, "Slide off the table and stand up." I wasn't sure what she meant. I thought she forgot that I didn't have my new cast on yet. Grandma motioned me to do what she said. I couldn't believe that my feet were flat on the floor. They pointed straight ahead. They weren't folded over. I couldn't stop looking at them. They looked like somebody else's feet, not mine. The nurse and her helper held on to me, and I took a few steps. It felt strange. Then we walked into the doctor's room. I thought they would be putting on more casts, but they just smiled and began clapping their hands. I didn't know what to do. I was scared and happy at the same time. No one had ever smiled at me and clapped like that before. When we got back to Grandma's house, I still had some trouble getting up the path. Without the cast, my legs felt a little shaky. But I made it with my crutches and with Grandma's help. Later that day, my brothers and sisters came by after school to write and draw on my casts. They were really surprised to see me standing in the doorway of Grandma's house with my straight feet. That's when my brother, Olinka, first called me Lucky. They were so happy for me, they began dancing around and singing, "Lucky, lucky, lucky, our brother is really lucky." So that's what everybody calls me now. My brothers and sisters ran home to tell Mom and Dad there was a big surprise waiting for them at Grandma's house. Mom knew that Grandma had been taking me to the hospital every week, but I'm not sure if Dad knew. They both looked really, really happy when they saw me. They didn't know what to say. They kept looking at my feet, especially my dad. They both hugged me. They hugged Grandma too. Mom was so happy, she began to cry. It took a few weeks for my legs and feet to get strong enough to carry water from the well, or to work in the garden, or help out with other things. I don't live with Grandma anymore. I live at home. I walked to school last week for the first time, ever. When the teacher asked me my name, I forgot my real name for a minute. I said, Assad, Lucky. Lucky was one of 200,000 babies who are born with clubfoot deformity every year, many in low-resource countries. Lucky was fortunate to have access to a healthcare provider who was trained to correct his deformity. Many children are not as fortunate. Lucky's club feet were corrected using the low-cost, low-tech, highly effective method developed by Dr. Ignacio Poncetti at the University of Iowa. It consists of a series of gentle manipulations to stretch the affected tissues and gradually realign the bones of the foot. The manipulations are followed by precisely applied plaster casts, which are changed weekly. Each cast holds the foot in a progressively better position. After a series of 4 to 6 casts, for most patients, the foot looks and functions normally. Infants and young children then wear a clubfoot brace, consisting of comfortable shoes connected to a separator bar when they sleep up to age 4. This prevents return of the deformity. More information about clubfoot and its correction can be found at poncetti.info and in Clubfoot, The Quest for a Better Life for Millions of Children, published by Ice Cube Press. Information about braces for clubfoot and Lucky's Feet in book format is available at clubfootsolutions.org. On behalf of the Luckies of the world, thanks for watching.